Assalamu alaikum and a very good day to all present today. Welcome to the fifth round of English debate competition, InterVarsity Science E-Debate Challenge 2021. The motion for this debate is this House regrets the privacy enhancing technology and its impact towards privacy. I will be the chairperson and the timekeeper for room 5. Let me now introduce the debaters to you. Acting as the government team for this debate is the team from IMU with Ms. Ashika as the Prime Minister, Ms. Sandra as the Deputy Prime Minister, and Mr. Mikhail as the government whip. Acting as the opposition team for this debate is the team from UM with Ms. Catherine as the opposition leader, Mr. Danish as the second opposition speaker, and Mr. Kuhan as the opposition whip. Our panel of adjudicators consists of Mr. Tuan Ashraf Jauhari bin Tan Ali from Uni KL. Now we come to our debate today. To open the case from the government team, I call upon the Prime Minister to start the debate session.
Hi, everybody. Are you able to hear me okay? Hello?
Yes.
Hi. All right. Just let me know when my time starts, or can I just go?
Wait.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name is Ashika Chankor, and I am the Prime Minister for the motion that this House regrets the Privacy Enhancing Technology, or PET, and its impact towards privacy. So I'm going to first start off my speech by talking a little bit about what privacy enhancing technology is and why in our paradigm and in the way, the mechanism of regret that we would like to apply for this debate is that we would prefer a world where the ability to encrypt your data, the ability to become anonymous on the internet, and the ability to withhold your identity or fake your identity or create new identities or impersonate people would be eliminated. Like the ability to do this through PET would be eliminated. And so that is our idea of how regret should exist in this debate. But PET in itself, as the info slide says, talks about how to minimize the ability for people to for service providers in particular to collect data on their users that use their service to gain access to the internet. And this allows them to use pseudonyms or encrypted data to make themselves unknown to other people, to other people that use the internet. And the stakeholders that we've identified here that suffers the most from this problem are kids, women, and marginalized groups in particular, who we feel are unsafe in this current landscape of the internet. So as the internet has become more widely accessible to people, as more people are using it in today's day and age, especially during a time of a pandemic, online interactions have almost completely replaced the typical interactions that we would do in our day-to-day lives. A big question about identity and anonymity comes into light, especially as more children and more people who are vulnerable have access to the internet. And why is this like a particular problem? So the issue at hand here is that privacy, more often than not, disproportionately benefits the people that misuse it. So the current status quo of how privacy is that exists now doesn't actually do a lot to protect or improve the lives of the women and children that are affected by people who misuse anonymity to reduce their own accountability to their actions, essentially. So an example of this would be predators who fake their identity to groom children. That's a very extreme case, but it's a very prevalent issue, and one that we feel is not really addressed by PET, and one that in fact, like the ability for like normal people to anonymize themselves has actually like made it more dangerous. And this disproportionate like the fact that it disproportionately causes harm towards them and that there are no current ways to protect them, like the only real protection that exists at this current time is like perhaps like a corporation has to ask for your consent like on whether they can like have access to your information or not. But like PET doesn't stop you from like harassing or bullying people, and it doesn't like stop you from, and we don't think that PET would ever reach a point where like you could stop that usage from normal people. And I think we would prefer a world where the access to the ability to make yourself anonymous and where all information is like given, like all information is necessitatively collected by the ISP and can be tracked and by the government in the same way how a government knows your address on file. Like your identity on the internet is also kept on file on the internet. So we're equating like our real world status quo to the status to and applying that to the internet, because it's becoming like the new social platform. It's become a replacement of how we exist in real life. And to ensure that people have the same quality of life and have the same like experience as they would in real life, you in real life can hold people accountable for what they do. And we feel that when you remove the ability for people to become anonymous, like the added blanket of security and the incentive to act irrationally, the incentive to break laws, the incentive to like make children to like misuse your power to abuse children, like it becomes so much less likely in government's paradigm, because essentially if the government is able to track and understand like your movement online, they are able to like people would have like less of an incentive to commit those things in the first place, and hence even if they did, there would then be checks and balances to ensure that those people will be held accountable. Because in current status quo, there is no real way to deal with ordinary people having access to the ability to hide their information and to obscure their identity. Like there's no way to like to ensure that the person that you're talking to is actually the person that they're talking to. And more often than not, the people who like take that data without your consent, that still happens within today. And there's no way to hold those people accountable either, because there's no blanket or framework of checks and balances that exist, right? Like it's all sort of like a bit of a wild, wild west, and there is to some extent, but it's not enough to protect the people that really matter in this situation. So overall, like the overall, side government is going to be focusing on how we can prioritize the safety of people who aren't protected by the current PET laws, and in fact are disproportionately affected by these laws, and how these people fail like a very vulnerable group of people that deserve the right to an internet that is safe, that is free of discrimination and is free of harassment. And we should hold people accountable to the things that they say. And in a landscape where freedom of speech is the right to your freedom of speech is being abused, we need to hold people accountable to the things that they say. And we can't allow people to get away with the actions that they do, simply because it doesn't, like, safety far in a way practically trumps like your right to privacy, in the sense that the current privacy laws don't really protect you. Or that, I rest the case. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To open the case from the opposition team, I call upon the leader of opposition to continue the debate session.
We think sacrificing the privacy and the safety of a majority of people that use the internet for the benefit of a small group of individuals is extremely difficult to reconcile on this side of government. I'm going to first respond to their one argument that came out from the speech before me, which is necessarily people that misuse privacy as a whole. Then I'm going to talk about why using PETs is the best for your online activities, and weigh out the people that we're able to help on both sides of the debate. Firstly, in regards to the rebuttal, I think the speaker before me talked about how anonymous identities enable people like pedophiles and criminals and such. I think on the side of government, there's a lot of other alternatives that these criminals can use to continue with the same effect of using anonymous identities. This looks like changing your PIN to different locations for it to be harder for authorities to track you. I think these are very simple alternatives that still exist, and I don't know why regretting PETs as a whole negates all these other alternatives. But also, secondly, we think PETs don't mean no disclosure, right? Because the alternative that happens on our side is that when we find out suspicious behavior, machine learning allows for these systems to track and flag this behavior or even ban a user before they do something serious. But even if that doesn't happen, we think on the other hand, we're able to then get this information from these criminals through court procedures, right? This looks like the authorities going to the court for a subpoena, the court granting the subpoena, and you getting access to this information. So if you want to talk about the extreme, we can deal with that as well very easily through the legal system that has time and time again been used by authorities in status quo and has worked. Before I want to move on to my debate and to prevent further confusion, I want to make a few clarifications. I think at the end of my speech, I'm going to definitely prove that this does not, using PETs as a whole, does not negate the capacity of governments to subpoena and utilize information when there's a threat to things like people's livelihoods or national security. It does not change even if you're able to use this type of technology. At the end of the day, what we're changing is the average user that is having their personal data risked by companies. We think, secondly, we have to have a weighing of the individual rights to privacy to a government's right to access these issues. So this issue of people using privacy doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? You need to weigh out why it's more important. We tell you that trend analysis shows that governments don't always utilize your info for good, right? There are a lot of instances where governments, especially corrupt authoritarian governments, use your information to track you, to subpoena you, to that penalize you, stuff like that. We think at the end of the day, people still want their privacy to be protected, and their right to privacy is a freedom that must be protected, even if it comes at the expense of national, the ability of a country to operate. At the end of the day, these are inalienable rights. What is the problem with status quo? Because I don't think there was much of a clarification on the side of government. I don't think it's just a problem of like targeted ads and companies but more so companies misusing your data. And this isn't just a one-off thing, but this is a very big issue that happens in status quo. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal that happened where companies were able to access information from Facebook for the use of something completely different, which the users did not consent to. And if this can happen to such a big company such as Facebook, it is safe to assume that this happens for most companies, if not all. We think, firstly, there's an expansive use of personal information that companies use that's inherently linked to technology. So everything right now, for example, your phones, or even your activities such as your banking details, your history, or your online transactions are being used by the government, and it is saved on clouds or your cookies. Secondly, we think social media and other platforms like your technology is extremely difficult to alienate or to remove, right? We think more and more people are willing to give up these rights, especially when they don't understand what they're giving up. But even if they do understand, we think that these people have to give up these rights because, especially in a pandemic, the only way for you to access things like your job or your education as such is to use the internet and to use online technology, which essentially forces you to give up your right to privacy. At the end of the day, people are attached more to technology and are willing to give up information for it. This data becomes more and more valuable and requires protection. What is the solutions that exist on the side of government that doesn't work? I think government would probably say that you ask social media companies to protect this data, but this is unlikely because there's a high incentive for them to keep this data not only for targeted advertising, but also to sell it to other companies. But we also think that it's unlikely for you to ask individuals to take greater protections because it is, at the end of the day, difficult for a lot of people to understand what they're giving up with in regards to privacy. The only alternative that is effective and helps the majority of people is the reliance on PETs, right? But before that, POI.
Okay, I understand that selling information is a breach of privacy, but what is the harm really, right? What is so harmful about breaching privacy? About selling information to companies.
Other companies get your information that you don't get access to. You are more vulnerable to things like scammers, which I think each one of us has received a scam call in the past few months or so. These are the harms that you are more vulnerable to in the event that your information gets sold. What is the spectrum of PETs that respond to different attacks, and why we think at the end of the day there's a greater utility from using PETs. We think firstly there are hardware PETs that acts as a digital lock to keep your personalized data decrypted, scrambled, and then stored into data drives, which means it is harder for third parties to access this data. You are less susceptible to also emergencies like electrical shortages. We also think there exists software methods. For example, this is a more diverse type of PET where it includes cryptographic algorithms where your personalized data is scrambled into multiple chains. So if there's a breach in one chain of your data, you'd have to go through a breach multiple times for you to be fully affected. I think at the end of the day, and this is the most important part of my speech, what is the importance of privacy from the use of PET in regards to the argument that came out from the speech before me? Government talked about how people are misusing this. But I think as a result of the pandemic, we have to recognize that there is a greater reliance on digitalizing your daily needs. You leave more of your traces on the internet. You are more vulnerable to people misusing your data and utilizing it against you. This looks like targeted advertising that can even be malicious in nature. This looks like people getting access to your bank details, your private information, your family, your address. These are things that are more likely to be vulnerable on the side of government. At the end of the day, in regards to ensuring that we're able to protect a greater amount of people, we think this happens better on the side of government, on opposition, where people have their data protected. And we've already explained to you how in instances where criminals misuse PETs to ensure that they're able to hide their identities online, there are alternatives that have been used by the authorities to ensure that we're able to get this information. We think at the end of the day, if you want to compare criminals to everyone else, we err on the side of the caution and protect everyone else.
I would like to thank the speaker for their speech. To continue our debate today, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for their side.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to begin by telling a story. We once had an incident where there was a K-pop star belonging to an extremely successful group known as FX. Their videos had hundreds of millions of views. She decided to leave the group. She decided to change the sort of music that she would put out. She decided to change what she was doing. She basically presented a whole new self towards the world, and the world did not like this. The world shunned her. The world harassed her with negative comments for years on end. The world threw around degradatory terms at her, such as slut, whore, and etc. And this eventually led to her taking her life. This is the true story of Sully, a former K-pop girl group member of the band FX. This is what happens when people are allowed to use their anonymous identity in order to attack others. Now, we are not talking about high-scale crime here. We are talking about your average internet user making negative posts over a prolonged period of time, which ultimately led to suicide. Essentially, these people are partly responsible for her suicide. Why are we not holding these people accountable? This caused a lot of public outrage in Korea, and as of today, people are required to register with their IC in order to make any sort of social media account or game account. For example, to register to make a League of Legends account, you need to register with your IC, and the name that you give, which will not be visible to players, needs to match the name on your IC in order for the account to be verified. See, this serves as a check and balance in order to ensure that this serves to solve three problems. Firstly, harassment. You cannot harass people and be expected to be free of repercussions, which is something that our side does. That side opposition simply does not address. How are they going to prevent harassment? Cases was brought up. It was brought up that machine learning happens, and it is possible for we have mechanisms in order to identify such cases. Why was nothing done about Sully? Because simply put, machines are not intelligent. They are not capable of identifying veiled harassment. They are not capable of they are not simply not fit to moderate a world in which simply not capable of moderating abstract concepts such as
POI?
words. And because of this, we believe that at best, social media companies such as Instagram, Facebook, etc., rely on user reports, which again aren't reliable. A lot of cases of harassment go unreported, and and due to this, we believe it is necessary to take greater measures in order to ensure that people who commit crimes, remember, these are not necessarily criminals. These are not necessarily high scale criminals. This could be your average social media user posting unsavory comments, and we believe that action needs to be taken against this. Now, it was constantly mentioned by the government that we are only targeting criminals and they are our sole stakeholder. Let me expand on that. We are not merely our paradigm does not merely benefit the government in identifying criminals. Our paradigm actually also protects the children, victims of crime, and at large the general public. Why? Let's go into that. Children are given access to the internet at a young age, and children are often allowed to essentially do what they wish unmonitored. It is very easy to create a fake account with a fake age and do whatever you want on the internet. This is why we believe that PET is merely enabling these children to create fake accounts, and because of privacy, no one will ever know they're a child. This actually brings more harm to the child, because as we have said, this puts them at risk of receiving messages from predators, grooming, and etc. So by ensuring that rather than increasing the amount of privacy rather than increasing the amount of privacy so that people can do what they wish under pseudonyms, we are ensuring that people need to register, people need to validate their age, and this is essentially protecting children from coming to harm on the internet, because simply they will not be given access because they cannot verify their age, and they cannot in a reliable manner. So let's go on. It was stated that the individual's right to a law was brought up about the individual's right to privacy, and the fact that corporations can be using their information in order to for ad revenue and etc. and put people at risk. Now let's look at what companies exactly do, right? So companies have terms and conditions that users must agree to. Now these terms and conditions are usually happen regardless of whether or not PET exists. If a company requires your age and your email address, whether or not PET exists, you will give your age and email address. Therefore, PET does nothing does nothing in the context of this argument, as this is an agreement. This is a consensual agreement between the company and the user. Whether or not PET is enforced is irrelevant, because the companies obtain the same information regardless, which brings us to the fact that PET should not be a thing, and we believe that there should be less anonymity online overall. Now let's move on. It was mentioned that the government censorship and that some authoritarian governments might exploit this. This will happen regardless of whether or not PET is enforced, because the governments act as ISPs, providers in said authoritarian states, and regardless of the presence of PET, they will have access to the information put forth by these individuals online. Therefore, the presence of PET does nothing to deter these acts that were previously brought up by side opposition, and we do not see how it benefits their case in any way. We believe that our paradigm actually protects the rights of the public, ensures that kids do not come to harm online, and also creates a greater incentive for governments to be transparent, because governments have the data of the people. Governments through ISPs will have the data of the people, and the people will want to know how the data is being used, similar to how the police know your location, your name, your location, your age, where you stay, and etc. We believe that the same laws should be applied to our digital space in order to ensure that people are protected. Imagine if the reverse were true. Imagine if in real life the government did not track your location. The government did not know where you live. If you were to report a crime, how is it going to be handled? It cannot. We believe that it is about time it is about time that we enforced viable mechanisms on digital space in order to ensure that those who do it wrong are held accountable for the times. B, those who should not have access, such as kids, do not gain access to things that they are not ready for. For example, kids should not be making Instagram accounts. Kids below the age of 13 should not have Facebook. Kids should not be accessing illegal sites containing inappropriate content. And we are tackling this problem, whereas side government is merely increasing privacy, which essentially gives the wrong people access to the wrong things.
Apologies. Sorry, I don't feel very well. So to move on, it was brought up that online transactions will not be private. Everyone will have access to your banking data. This is not true, because in situations like this, such as online transaction, yes, we accept that this is private matters, and releasing it can be harmful to the person. Therefore, any information that is exchanged in this transaction will be between the individual and the company or bank site that they are using. It will not go outside. No one else will have access to it. The government will not endeavor to interfere in someone's personal bank transaction. Now, the difference between your paradigm and our paradigm is people know that their information is out there.
people know that if they do something wrong, it will come back to them. Whereas in your paradigm, it is not that people's information is not given out, as we must remember that a lot of applications and third-party sites have their own terms and conditions which users agree to, which ultimately results in their personal data being available. We are merely saying that there should be a way for governments, ISPs, to essentially monitor what to essentially have an idea of what kind of information is being exchanged, so that in the event it should breach any real world laws or bring harm to someone else, as outlined in the example before, they will be able to take the appropriate action. And this is something we do not see in the real world. Yes, I will take your POI. Yes. There was a POI.
It's past 7.
Oh, apologies. I'm so sorry. Well, with that being said, I would like to state that everything that happens in their paradigm regarding internet privacy being violated, everything that happens in our paradigms regarding concerns about privacy violations by companies still happens in their paradigm. And therefore, our paradigm is superior because, firstly, we offer protection and we are endeavoring to tackle other issues that their paradigm completely fails to address. And we believe that we would have won this debate. I have never been prouder to represent. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for their remarks. Now, I shall call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for their side.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, that's great. This debate is not about whether we regret anonymity of criminals. That is non-contentious. Of course we do. This debate is about how recognizing the impacts of what PETs had is PETs something that is valuable in the solutions that it has created for the various problems that continue to exist in the context of privacy. So while it is true that there are issues of people that are hiding themselves in order to cyberbully or in order to target vulnerable communities, specifically children, are PETs a result of this becoming worse? The answer is no, because of two reasons. The first is we receive no evidence that just because PET is a structure in which it can create better protection against breaches of privacy, it is being disproportionately utilized by this specific group in order to catfish children. Secondly, and more importantly, is that this does not change in their world as well, because of the fact that it's impossible to trace an individual who can create an anonymous account anyway. In status quo, without PET, you can subject yourself to a false profile picture, a false location, and use a VPN to ping your location off to several different countries depending on how many times you are interacting on this platform in the first place. The argument there is to discuss on the accountability of the social media platforms, less on how we are utilizing PETs in order to dictate and trace this person. Because even without PETs, the simple access of things like VPNs, or the simple fact that they can utilize these platforms to interact with unassuming children who are innocent and are susceptible to these sorts of things, will not change. The answer to this is like what Catherine already told you. We flag suspicious behavior based on algorithm. The response that platforms are not smart enough or AI is not smart enough is just blatantly untrue. There's been multiple breakthroughs on algorithmic sciences to show that the moment in which that personal information is being shared in chat boxes, automatically the platform shuts the chats down and bans the user that tries to interact with these children. All of this goes to show that these are the more appropriate solutions in order to tackle this issue. However, what is the issue that we cannot resolve by simply changing the algorithm? What are the problems that the current status quo is facing that we cannot resolve simply by arguing for more forced disclosures? These are things like big data breaches that are happening throughout the time. The POI you got from government is what's the harm of data breaches is completely devoid of what's happening on the ground in the world that we see today. Credit card fraud has risen by 35% and has seen a $30 billion increase of individuals having their bank details stolen globally. These are not from people swiping your cards and pickpocketing from your wallets. These are individuals that are accessing data banks in which your credit card informations are stored into. These are people that have access to your addresses, have access to your voting information, have access to your family's members' information of where they vote, how they behave, what their preferences are, and they are negatively using it to uh, to influence massive amounts of trends in the best case. In the worst case, they're utilizing this material and data to enrich themselves at the expense of this large population. So what is the response? The response cannot be to to create accountability procedures by profit incentivized companies who do not benefit from simply improving privacy. The response is to improve confidence of individuals, especially in the time where we are digitizing more and more data due to the pandemic and due to us being more reliant on technology, on PETs. And we do it in two ways, either through hardware or either through software. So, but before that, let's go into this idea of the fact that criminals are more important than people's rights to privacy, i.e., they are telling you that governments need to know where you live, what you work as, how many members of family you have. These are things that we are not contesting. PETs do not change the nature of disclosure. When you purchase a property, you still have to register. When you register, you have to register with the land office. When you get a job or when you live in a certain area, you need to disclose that to relevant authorities in order to decide how much you should be taxed, in order to decide which constituency you are going to vote. The argument is whether these types of data should be protected under a separate or additional firewall known as PETs, either through physical data banks, which are reinforced with greater mechanical components to prevent data breaches, or decentralizing this data so that less and less people have access to a total completion of data at any given time. These are the types of mechanisms that we're talking about, not talking about why people shouldn't disclose relevant and necessary data to the authorities. So I think this cuts across that analysis from there. But secondly, and more importantly, is the individual's right to data in the first place. They argue that governments needs access to data at all material times, even if it is difficult for them to justify because they are the best actors. This is not responding to the trend analysis of what Catherine told you when she spoke to you about how political parties are using this data is refragmented and not accessible by these big corporations, even if they are the ones that are creating the platforms. So even if Facebook are the ones that have are storing your data, the fact that that data is crypted, decentralized, and fragmented means that they cannot utilize this data in the way that it was previously used to harm the majority stockholder that we're talking about. All in all, side opposition regrets that there are individuals who may hide behind PETs to improve anonymity. But the solution isn't to deny everyone access to better protection of their data, given the fact that more and more people are reliant on their data being digital. And we can solve these problems by ensuring better regulation and better accountability measures of these platforms. But we cannot do that when it comes to the average man's data, when it comes to his banking information, his familial information, his purchase preferences. These are all things that require PET to ensure a standard metric of privacy. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the speaker for their remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, and the honorable adjudicator, I shall now call upon the government whip to rebut.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second half of today's debate. I am the government whip, and I'll be trying to just try to summarize the whole debate to the best of my ability, as well as rebut some points given by the opposition side, right? And now here, I just want to say like the overall crux of what our argumentation is, right? What government is trying to say is that we stand to benefit more from lesser privacy than we do losing, right? And we try to say this because for people like performing like predatory advancements on children, for people who are sending harassment like inappropriate pictures to women, those people will be better protected under our side, where we don't have PET. And like my first speaker and second speaker has said, we don't only just regret PET and like the inclusion of PET and just like roll back that thing. We just want the internet itself to be less anonymous as a whole, right? And this includes maybe things like removing net neutrality, making it so that the actions on the internet are monitored by the government, right? And so essentially what we're saying is that the nation is safer as a result, right? But first, let's go on to the rebuttals and a few contradictions that we have in the opposition case, right? Now, opposition has said that they try to mitigate their harm of these predators or whatever hiding behind whatever by saying that we can subpoena and then get their information anyway, right? But that's the thing, that kind of information is protected by PET, right? And that's the kind of barrier that we're trying to fight exactly in our case, right? You can't have it both ways and say that, okay, you know what, you can government, you can sue them and subpoena and then find your information, but at the same time, bad actors cannot use their information because the information is protected. You can't live in a fantasy world where everything goes according to your case, right? There's going to be some pros and cons. You have to take some harm. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect scenario, right? And in our scenario, we agree. We acknowledge the fact that there is lesser protection of privacy. We just argue that protection of privacy should not be a priority because it's much less severe and smaller on the scale in comparison to protection of children and in comparison to protection of women. And like the first speaker has said, in light of the pandemic, in light of even more people being connected through the internet has to change. It is not some old piece of old technology where people used to communicate anymore. It's literally a second Earth. It's like a second location where people can interact with each other. And because it's a location where people interact with each other, we need laws to protect them and we need protection to exist. And we cannot protect people properly if people are anonymous, right? That makes sense, right? Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Okay, never mind. Let's move on, right? So what is no PT? What are we exactly saying? Like, let me just clarify the mechanism. We're not saying that everyone has the public information, like has their information public. Like, I go to your Twitter page, I know exactly where you live. It's not like that. It's just that information is readily available to, let's say, either the ISP or the government or the whatever. It doesn't really matter the specific mechanisms of it. But the point is, if you send me a dick pic, I can report you, and whoever is in charge will know exactly where you live. So that the police say can go to your house and and charge you appropriately, right? That's the point that we're trying to make here. This already exists in real life, like outside the internet, right? If some people do some sort of crime, they can be charged because they're there, right? But it's a challenge on the internet because of the PET and because of anonymity as a whole, right? So let's move on to rebuttals and just like look over what the opposition has given us, right? So opposition is trying to basically put this like huge harm on selling information, Facebook selling information, right? The thing is, even with protection of privacy laws, right, like PET, whatever, it's not guaranteed that people will even follow it in the first place, right? If privacy laws already exist, but people are still bad actors will always be bad actors. They will always do bad things with your information, right? And so it's a mutual harm in both scenarios. And we believe that in their world, it's not even less or anything. Like it exists in both worlds, right? So it's not a harm that we have to take alone, right? And if anything, just make it more transparent that the fact that information is being stored, so that people will be more held accountable, right? If the fact that data storing was transparent, it will be much easier to hold those companies accountable, right? So because bad actors exist in both worlds, what about the good actors? What about the good governments, right? If we don't have PET, if we don't have net neutrality, and we can track the people who are using the internet, we can more readily give punishments to people who commit crimes, right? For example, people who try to target children, people who harass women, right? Those are more targeted. And yes, you can say that, oh, but people use VPNs and they can like go on the dark web to sell like guns or whatever, right? But this also exists in your status quo and it's not solved at all, right? Right now, we're just trying to solve different problems. That's the difference between government and opposition here. Opposition is trying to solve the problem that of breach of privacy, while government is trying to solve the problem of harassment occurring, of child predatory advancements occurring, right? And now, so that becomes a value judgment that is on the edge right now. Which problem is more important for us to solve? Is it the protection of children and women, or is it avoiding targeting ads because you don't want to be given an ad about microwaves? You want to be given an ad about cars instead or something. I don't know, right? It doesn't exactly make sense. A lot of data breaches, for example, like credit card fraud, right? Like credit card fraud usually happens due to social engineering anyway. It's not really a big deal. Yeah, sure. I'll take a POI.
Yeah. How are PETs going to solve the issue of harassment given that it is already a critical issue without PETs? What changes?
Okay, let me reiterate, right? Not only are we regretting PET, we are also regretting the notion that privacy is important to protect. That's exactly what we're regretting. The PET and the impact on privacy, right? So what we're trying to say is we want to lessen the privacy, not just go with status quo. We're not saying go with status quo, we don't like privacy or whatever, or like go back 5 years. We say go forward 5 years, right? Think of the internet as just a second world, a second space in which privacy does not exist. Not to say everybody knows where everybody lives, right? But if you were my neighbor, I know where you live. It's not that big of a deal if I know where you live. It shouldn't be like that on the internet anyways. Like if you look at like what are the harms to not having privacy really, right? If you want to talk about targeted ads, that's already happening anyway. If you want to talk about let's say countries like China tracking governmental dissent, that already happens anyway. So we can't control the bad actors. Let's try to improve the livelihood of people who live in countries that don't want to kill the people, right? Or the countries that have freedom of speech, right? Like look at America, for example, a country that prides itself on freedom of speech. There are people who are saying very racist things or whatever, giving up their full names, right? There's not much harm to not having privacy on the internet. Look at all the celebrities who are able to live pretty much okay, right? And we're not even saying that you want to breach the privacy to everyone else. We're just saying that we want to hold people who do harm on the internet more accountable, and by lessening that privacy, that right to privacy, so that the governments have access to that information, so that the government can actually do something good about it, right? We want to protect children, protect women, right? And look, we breached the privacy, but is that really a big deal? I think that's what side government is trying to really propose here. The only way the opposition can win if they prove that privacy is inherently a super huge right to uphold, whereas government believes that just like real life, you can know what my full name is, you can know where I live. It doesn't necessarily harm me, right? Yeah. With that, I am proud to propose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech. It is now time to listen to the rebuttals of opposition whip.
Yeah, give me a second.
Okay.
All right. Am I audible? I am, right?
Yes.
Okay. Judge, at this point, I don't know what's worse. I don't know whether it's worse for government team to run a This House Would Ban Internet Anonymity debate, or what's worse is that they downplayed every single exhaustive list of harms that we talked about on why, in the absence of PET, how there's security breaches and data leaks, how it harms vulnerable communities to a large extent, how credit card frauds expects global economies and monetary incomes of a lot of people, and how it hurts livelihoods to a large extent. So at this point, even I can't answer the question. Judge, you answer it for me. In this speech, I'm going to resolve one main issue, which is which mechanism has better protective framework for people at large. But before I discuss this, I just want to point out the most important caveat in this debate. Panel note that the government team only has one argument. They want to help minorities. They illustratively proved in different speeches on different segments of minorities like women, like minorities like children, minorities like poor communities, but essentially it's the same thing. The first thing I want to point out is we don't abandon them in our fight using PET framework. Why is this true? Because to a large extent, we told you any form of malicious behavior will be flagged by our algorithm. The only contention to dispute this was to say that the algorithm isn't smart enough, which is untrue because the algorithm is constantly improving and evolving to even be more complicated, even better than human tracking to some extent because of the sheer improvement of this AI and the systems that go into this algorithm. We didn't hear any response towards an improved algorithm being able to tackle down on this crime. So the lack of the response means that we can insinuate that it is true to some extent that the algorithm works. Secondly, note panel, we were the charitable side. We debated an even if to say, let's say we trade off vulnerable communities and why we protect public at large. Why is that a better benefit? But I'm just not going to let them get away with this and address the elephant in the room. To a large extent, opposition isn't actually abandoning minorities and helping public at large. But I'll tell that later on in even if why is that still okay. Because to a large extent, we think, firstly, this is a regret motion. That means you have to weigh out how PET has destructed society to a large extent in status quo in the past and weigh it out into a reimagined world of what you want as an alternative. But the government team's only alternative first came out a deputy prime minister, which is first a late mechanism to come up with. And secondly, it wasn't mechanized. They told us they want to mandate registration. People have to register their details in social media. The point about that was our leader of opposition already told you there is no incentive for social media companies to make it mandatory for you to fill registration forms and to get your data. The fact that they are profit incentive, they have no other obligation than to improve the system, get more users, and to popularize that system. Why is it somehow they'll have some form of moral obligation to adopt the system and make it mandatory? So the problem with government was they didn't have a mechanization of what the alternative is and how exactly it will work out, being juxtaposed with our very well explained PET systems and its structural benefits. Secondly, we think internet anonymity and the ability for criminals to track down in vulnerable communities exists in their world as well. The fact that it's as simple as people changing the IP settings and it's difficult to track down maybe in social circumstances as well, changing a profile picture on Facebook, Instagram, all this enabling of grooming and sexual predator heavily happens under their world as well, and their alternative doesn't solve it because they didn't prove us the feasibility of alternative and didn't juxtapose the benefits that we talked about compared to that harm. So on that preliminary issue, we think we to a large extent help minorities because our systems flag this behavior. In the event that we don't, we think we can subpoena this and make sure it becomes a legislated affair in which we still punish those circumstances. All of this also needs to acknowledge that to a large extent, we do call out predator, we do call out abuse, which means all efforts that we have in activism, for example, all efforts that we have into making sure social engineering of this effort all happens hand in hand with PET. They cannot debate in a world where we don't have PET. Suddenly all this goes away. Suddenly harassment is something of a big problem. I think it was very unrealistic for them to frame that way. So they didn't answer all the analysis on how those things can also happen on their side and how it also affects them through PET, which I'll explain later on. Why do we think PET systems prefer much better protection towards users, and why is this really important? First, this team was very disingenuous into downplaying what privacy means. They say, what's the harm of privacy? Privacy, it's an intrinsic human characteristic that we cannot be devoid of. We cannot detach ourselves from. The fact that we don't have CCTVs in the toilet means that privacy is a really important thing. The fact that we don't have transparent houses for people to see what they're doing. Although we will justify why this privacy is really important, but on a principle level, it's an inalienable right in which any intrinsic trait that individuals have, and it's something that is so important because it justifies safety. People feel the measures of safety in a world in which their privacy is something that is upheld. We think all of the framework the government talked about will be severely detrimental in a world in which people fear that whatever information that they give to their banks will be potentially hacked and their money can go away. Will be feared when whatever information or things that they post about social media can be sold to political parties. The levels of the implication of safety and confidence can only happen in a world in which we give them the right to privacy. So on a principle level, they never told us why privacy is something that is so bad, considering that it's actually something that is an inalienable trait that exists, and we think there are practical outcomes towards it. But let's take them at their best. Let's say they still want practical reasons and not just principle. DPM talks to us about how the K-pop artists in FX that committed suicide. While we think my preliminary response of criminals and all the hate crimes also simply apply, but let me give you other stories to tell in order to be convincing more often than not. So 87 million Facebook users were victims of their data being leaked based on the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Within the Australian Labor Party has leaked thousands and thousands of voters' information so that they want the weird excuse of wanting strategic campaigning. Billions of users have been victims of their credit card being fraudulent and being breached, and all of those money were transactioned towards other areas. If you want to persuasively tell us a story of suicide, we can tell you 101 other stories of billions of other individuals' livelihoods being pragmatically affected by the result of you not protecting their data and not you abiding privacy. We think privacy is so important in terms of its practical benefits as well as principal benefits on the system and the confidence that people have on the systems. So where is the comparative in this debate? The comparative on government wasn't to tell us that internet anonymity is bad, but rather to tell us why PET structurally makes these crimes worse, which we already refuted. More importantly, they never acknowledge all the significant harms that happen in their world with regards to all of the breaches that we talked about, with regards to all the companies that have little to no adherence towards things like keeping information private. All these things will be leaked into their world. We think PET systematically decentralizes and fragments this information to make sure all this data is protected. I think it's very clear that opposition wins on the idea on how protection is much better, but also told you why it's not vulnerable towards minorities under circumstances. For all those reasons, we win this debate.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech. Now that we have heard all the three speakers from both teams, we should take a short break of 1 minute. During this time, both the government and the opposition teams will prepare the reply speech. The time of 1 minute has ended. I shall now invite the second opposition speaker from the opposition team to deliver the reply speech.
Thank you. Here is why team opposition wins. The first reason is which problem is more pertinent. And the metric to decide this isn't to look at who are the stakeholders. It is to look at which solution actually resolves this problem. Let's look at government's problem. It's the idea of harassment and the attack of vulnerable communities due to the fact that many people can hide behind the fact that their digital persona is anonymous, and therefore PETs are a significant barrier in order to respond and interact with these individuals to create this change. What is the reason? What is the response coming from opposition that they have yet to reconcile? First, we tell you that this is not unique to PETs and the fact that you can do this even without PETs. Then they give you the bold claim of telling you that privacy doesn't matter. What's the harm? Targeted ads. I can tell you my full name. The whip tells you that give me, what is this? I can tell you my full name. I can tell you where I live. That's not the privacy that we care about. If you really don't think that there's a harm of privacy, why don't you input your bank account details in the chat right now? The password to your Instagram, the password to your phone. Let us access all the chats that you've had over the past 3 years, since privacy is no big deal and you have no problem sharing it with the world. You can't do it because of the fact that you value this aspect of your life that you think is private. The only difference is that because of PETs and because of data protection laws and because of the values of privacy that is enshrined in all democratic institutions, you've never had to worry about this privacy being breached. You've never had to worry about a random debater from having your bank account info because of the fact that this info is protected. Imagine a world where you were to accept the metric or the argument of whip of Guff Whip and just privacy is not important. I can tell you my name. It automatically discredits all the progress that we have made in order to keep this information private, in order to keep this information protected. And it doesn't even come at the benefit of capturing individuals who catfish. And it doesn't even mean that that's the exclusive way to capture catfish. We can report, we can flag, we can create algorithm as it progresses to ensure that people won't have this access. We can subpoena and we can surveil individuals who we flag. These are the appropriate measures that we can take against these individuals that they think is extremely dangerous. But juxtapose that to the problem that opposition posits, which is massive data breach from billions of users of a popular social media platform or from government information. Can we flag individuals who breach billions of people's information? Can we report the fact that our privacy has already been breached, but we have no idea who breached it? We can't. So what is the response? Or even if we could, the livelihoods of individuals have already been impacted. We said targeted advertisements once in Catherine's speech, and they have strawman targeted advertisements until the end of our substantive speech, and says that harm is not proportionate to individuals who are vulnerable, who are women, minorities. That's a cheap way to try to win a debate when it is clear that the harms that we are talking about go so much more beyond that. It's about people having to risk information that they deem to be valuable to them, regardless of whether there's a possibility of breach or whether you don't think it's important. The fact that they believe it is important is enough to justify why we should protect it. How do we protect it given the fact that there's no natural incentive occurring in status quo? There's no one who, social media companies do not care that 87 million of their users have had their privacy breached. Corporations and governments do not care that individuals from constituencies have had their influence impacted through political campaigns. The response is PETs, because you're able to create hardware and software alternatives from people being able to access this data. They talk about bad people and if they will abuse if they want to. How are they going to abuse if data is fragmented, decentralized, and inaccessible to all of them? This is the best response against individuals who want to attack your privacy, and this is why this is the problem that is more important. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech. I shall now call upon the Prime Minister from the government team to deliver their reply speech.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Prime Minister. I'm going to be very frank with everybody. I'm not a super tech savvy person, but I am a little bit confused as to how side opposition has kind of gotten away with both saying that the government has the should be trusted with the authority, and like PETs is very important because like companies and governments are not doing enough to like have these technologies to protect the people that are in place. But I'm also really confused because like the technologies that of PET that exist today are not like are either used by people who are tech savvy enough that want to abuse that technology to encrypt their own data and take advantage of other people, or also those companies that they claim like, you know, will steal your data, will steal your information, and et cetera, like all the harms that they place. Like I'm very confused as to how like it's necessarily like helpful, because like PETs that exist at least now in status quo or has existed in the past they're used by people who are like knowledgeable enough about these things that they're able to either take advantage of them, as they do, like as corporations and those people have done, or they are not knowledgeable, which is what most people are. And so I don't know like what you're trying to say here. Are you saying that governments are like should then like have PET, or should they not? Because like to an extent, like we're not talking about decentralization, because if you say that governments can't be trusted with the individual encrypted data, then I don't know why by that line of logic you should also expect them to like make the effort to protect you, because you've already believed that they shouldn't be trusted with that information. Like you already don't think that they're going to do those things. So like we believe that like, okay, fine, if ISPs and like can't be private entities, like I think like we've already previously talked about, like let's nationalize it. We gave a mechanism, like okay, let's just trust the government in making those things. And your response was, well, some governments are bad. You did the exact same thing too. Your response was equal to that, and saying, well, some governments are bad. We'll say, okay, well, PET, the way that it's implied now, the way it's applied now is also bad. It's used also by bad people. So I feel like there's no real clash here. But where we win out is that in our paradigm, we address the fundamental issue with anonymity and privacy on the internet to take advantage of people. And we believe like transparency on all sides is the only real way to prevent the inequity of inequity and the access to information, right? Because as Sandra my DPM like pointed out, the issue like with current here today is like you're kind of all dependent on like the supposed notion that your data is protected, because like even PETs, like you are quote unquote protected, but like that's enforced by like the companies, right? That's enforced by governments, which you distrust. You said they're not trustworthy. So I don't know, like isn't that like a current issue that we're trying to talk about? Like isn't that the problem? So yeah. I'm glad that we're on the same page here, that we shouldn't trust them. And so we should just be transparent with that information. Sensitive information should be kept private, yes. We think that those security measures like aren't necessarily linked to PET, but like they are a part of that. But more often than not, they're also like out of an average person's control. So like they haven't really been beneficial. Then that point still stands. So with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now come to the end of the debate. This round is a silent round, and the verdict will be given tomorrow. With that, the House of Parliament is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, UM.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm
Thank
you.
you.
See all of you.
Thank you.
See you guys. See you tomorrow.
Okay,
guys.
Ashraf,
Yes.
you want to know their time, right?
It's okay. I jot down my on my own. I jot down
Okay.
the time, so it's okay. Thanks
Okay.
thanks for today, Sarah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.